about car chases. There's been two pretty significant car chases in Adelaide in the last 4 or 5 days. One was over 90 minutes. The other involved allegedly an 11-year-old boy. And it's a really difficult decision as to how police conduct a car chase. They've come a long way, as I said, from the 70s cop movie when they're freewheeling around the streets of San Francisco and getting airborne and crashing and putting sirens on the roof and things like that. They have to be very, very careful about doing it, but yet they still have to apprehend the person who is escaping from them. So how do they do it safely? I'll chat to Dr. Terry Goldsworthy next.
Homeward Bound with Jules Schiller
on ABC Radio Adelaide.
Dr. Terry Goldsworthy is a criminologist at Bond University. He joins me now. Welcome, Terry.
Yeah, good evening.
It's interesting, this whole idea of car chases, because, we have them reasonably often in Adelaide. We've had one that went over 90 minutes on Thursday night. The car was pursued by the police chopper for an hour and a half. It was spiked twice in the city, and it only sort of stopped because it hit a police car and then a tree. So this is at the extreme end of car chases, Terry. Why do you think that police pursuits are one of the most challenging operational situations facing officers?
Well, look, they really are. In real time, they occur quite quickly, and there's a number of unknowns in terms of, who may be driving the vehicle, what their motivation is to get away, and where you may be heading in regards to the chase. So all those things go into a risk assessment that needs to be made by the police and the vehicle primarily, in a very short period of time, like within about probably the first 30 seconds. And then you have, some kind of risk management taking place back, I guess, in the communications centre where the senior officers will be in terms of what's going to go on. So, we know these things are inherently dangerous. We do have some data from the Australian Institute of Criminology which tells us that less than 1% of pursuits result in fatal crashes. And that's often, I think, the concern of the community, that these things inevitably end up with innocent people dying. They don't. It's very uncommon for that to happen. And in those circumstances where that does occur, usually, overwhelmingly, it's deaths involved other people in the pursued vehicle. It's not innocent people who are bystanders. So there are problems around it. Certainly, there's other issues around, what we call restrictive policies as well.
So, it's not as simple as, the police put their siren on, the car takes off and they just hit the accelerator and just chase after it and, swerve around streets and things like that, Terry. That they have to make an assessment as to how safe it is, and then they use other methods like a police chopper?
Yeah, well, we do have other methods now. You mentioned spikes before, road spikes to take out deflate the tyres of the vehicle. They won't necessarily stop a committed offender. They'll continue to drive on the rims for whatever that's worth and how much they can actually get away from the police. The choppers are interesting. Choppers need to be kind of up in the air, ready to go. If a chase happens, by the time the chopper responds, unless it's a 90-minute event like you talked about, the chopper probably won't get up into the air in time to be of any great assistance. And
that would be expensive, wouldn't it? Have a police chopper follow a car for 90 minutes, Terry? That's got to be up there in the tens and thousands of dollars.
Oh, yeah. Choppers are not cheap at all, and they usually require some high-level authorisation to use them for that very reason. It's not like the movies where the police chopper, starts at 8 o'clock in the morning and sits up in the air till 10 o'clock at night. Basically, it's used only when required purpose. So it still does come back to the police on the road and the vehicles, etc. What we saw in Queensland, we introduced very restrictive policy, and we had... it's hard to get data on how many pursuits we have anymore, but we had 630 in 2006. By 2017, that had reduced to just 100. So basically, our police weren't allowed to pursue. And what we did was we introduced, don't pursue them. What we'll do is we'll charge them with evading police. So very quickly, the criminals learned that if the police try to intercept you, just don't stop. Drive as dangerously as you can, and they'll stop pursuing you. So it was kind of self-defeating to some degree, because we found that the amount of evade offences went up astronomically, and of those evade police offences, we were probably only solving about 40% of them. So we weren't actually getting the people who were driving dangerously at all.
I'm talking to Dr. Terry Goldsworthy. He's a criminologist at Bond University. We're talking about police pursuits and different policies that have emerged over the years. It's not just the 70 detective sort of gung-ho chase. Police have more restrictive policies. They use less confrontational approaches when it comes to pursuing cars. Terry, can any police around Australia be charged for reckless driving if they do slam on the accelerator and the other car slams on the accelerator and, say, a pedestrian might be killed as a result, or another person in another vehicle? Can they be charged?
Yeah, you can be. I mean, in Queensland, you certainly can be charged with dangerous driving. You're not protected by that. We're protected, police are protected in terms of breaching the traffic regulations as such, but it doesn't stop you or protect you if you're driving dangerously. So we've had issues up here where, for instance, a police motorcyclist reached speeds of 200 kilometres an hour on a highway. They were disciplined and received some guidance. Those kind of speeds just aren't tolerated up here. In WA, they introduced laws protecting police from criminal charges after an officer did kill a bystander during a high-speed pursuit. So, if I was a police officer now and I was pursuing someone, I'd want to be very confident that it was a life-endangering offence that I was pursuing them for, not something like a stolen car or speeding or something like that, because I don't think you'd be very protected or supported by the police services that much.
And before you go, Dr. Terry Goldsworthy, car spikes, you hear about them all the time. How long have they been deployed for, and what do they actually do?
Look, they've been around now. I'm just seeing when I left the police, they've been around for a few, so probably the early 2000s they came out. Basically, they're like a rolled up, almost like caterpillar trap, I guess you could say, and you slide them out and they extend across a road. They can be problematic. We have had an officer up here who was severely injured by a stolen vehicle driven by juveniles, where he was hit and collected trying to deploy the spikes. And my understanding is that there's now a workplace health and safety investigation in Queensland because the police haven't been trained properly in how to deploy those spikes. So it can be problematic. I mean, we don't do what you see over in the US where they use the bump stop kind of manoeuvre where they have the little bull bars in the front. They just whack the car in the back to make it spin around. We don't engage in that at all over here. That does have some issues around it. But sometimes you need to take action. We had an example up here where some armed offenders, were carjacking cars and made their way from the North Coast down to the Gold Coast, like 200 kilometres over an hour or so. And they just danced around the Queensland police. They went across the border and New South Wales police took them out within about 10 minutes because they have a much more vigorous pursuit policy. So, the proof is in the pudding in some cases.
Dr. Terry Goldsworthy, like you say, it's a delicate balance the police have to make when they're pursuing cars, and it's certainly a job I'm glad that I don't have to do. Thanks for giving us your expertise.
Thanks, Jules.
That's Dr. Terry Goldsworthy. He's a criminologist at Bond University discussing a couple of pretty dramatic car chases that have occurred in South Australia. And you've got to say hats off to the police. These are very, very hard situations and they haven't resulted in any deaths or significant injury.